Hello, Humblebees, and people that watch Cave to the Cross Apologetics. Yeah. I'm Patrick, and I guess if you ask silly questions to your friends online, you have to make response videos. And so I'll, of course, be putting the links to Lauren's and Becca's answers to my questions to them. Even though it gives them great content, I guess this means that I have to do it as well. But I'll put those links to the description below. And so, obviously, not Cave to the Cross Apologetics. No Tony, sadly. So you'll probably be getting about a fifth grade level of answers to these questions. The first one is, do you look for a book on a subject to read, or do you come across a book and think it looks good, and that's what you end up studying? So I go based on Tim Challies' book recommendations that he does kind of once a month and see if there's anything that's there, or he does kind of a daily crawl through the Kindle deals, and so there's something there. What I like to do is I like to read an author's complete bibliography. I did that with C.S. Lewis and Howard Hendricks, and you really pick up on a lot of nuances from people's writing style, and especially someone as prolific as C.S. Lewis. You kind of get to know them, and especially reading Howard Hendricks' books, he wrote on a whole bunch of different subjects, which one's a good introduction on how to study the Bible. And there's another one called Iron Sharpens Iron that takes a two kind of sides approach to having to modeling with somebody, a fellow Christian, to mentoring them, and then to be a mentee. And so it covers both bases. And essentially, it's a guidebook for men to ask other men to be their friends. And it was really good. And you tend to hear a lot of the same jokes and kind of get their flow and patterns. So that's what I tend to do. Or if there's something that's really interesting to me, G.K. Beale had a book on how the garden is a model. The Garden of Eden is a model for everything that's set up, the temple, and I'm really interested in kind of the symbolism of the temple, and then he pours it down to Christ and the new heaven, new earth, and that was really good. And so pretty much I found a lot of his stuff. As far as apologetics goes, it's really just recommendations from Tony, because his library is as massive as mine. Of course, he's got probably he's like only 20 years older than me, so he's got a little head start on me as far as collections. And of course, when you're a doctor and earn your doctorate, you have to have books in the background of your studies. So I go based on a lot of his books, or just other books that people recommend, watching podcasts and stuff like that. So just kind of whatever piques my interest, whatever sounds different. You can only read about the Kalam argument so many times. You can only read about young Earth creationism or old Earth creationism battles for so long before you kind of have to move on and find a different niche. Number 2, do you stop reading if the book isn't good, and how long do you give it? So I love bad movies. I absolutely adore them. The cheesier, the better. And I can spend 2-3 hours, 6 hours watching just bad movies back to back. For some odd reason, there's something about reading that's like precious time. That's precious brain molecules that you're not just taking it in. You're absorbing it. You're coming up with responses that I just cannot stand. And so I will get to a book where I'm like, man, this is not keeping my interest, or this is just poorly written, and I just can't go on. There was a book that I was reading called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and the premise was magic during the Napoleonic Wars. It was sold, right off the bat, sold. And there was a miniseries coming out, and I'm like, okay, I've read British literature before, I can do this. And I got the 3-volume set, because of course, why would I want to wait for any pauses? And so I was reading this one book that had 3 volumes. And I was like, man, nothing has happened. Where am I at? Oh, I'm in the middle of volume 2? How did anyone continue to read this for as long as I did before just giving up. It was awful, and not much happened, and it was just so boring. So I'm like, well, I'm done, and I'm good with being done unless if I really need to know the ending, and then that's when I appreciate the people that write summaries to Wikipedia pages for books and movies, because sometimes I'll read a book or watch a movie and go, I completely didn't understand that. Someone else helped me, and so it's good to have kind of the cliff notes there. So, yes, it's not as bad as Wuthering Heights, but yeah, you think something about magic during Napoleonic Wars would be something, and all I got was ships made out of rain right in the middle of Volume 2. It's a giant snooze fest. Which fiction or non-theology books do you enjoy? I will pretty much read anything, but definitely sci-fi, because, of course, geek. So I think I have to turn in my nerd card if I didn't. I can't quite get into fantasy because I believe everything is Star Wars. And, yes, that's an oversimplification, but it seems like a majority of fantasy books is farm boy, dreams of something more. He hears that there's a prophecy by who? No one really knows, just these prophecies come out of the ether, and you're just supposed to believe them. He meets an old man who will train him. He gives up his life for the youngling. He meets a rogue and a princess, and they go off to fight the big bad, but the big bad isn't the big bad. And so through the power of friendship and magic, or sorcery and swords, then you win in the end. And I've read enough fantasy to kind of get that trope, and it really takes a lot for me to pick up a fantasy book. And then I have friends that recommend fantasy books all the time because I tell them that, and they're like, "Oh no, but you haven't read." And I'll read the first one. I'm like, "Gosh, this is terrible, boring. It's a 30-book series. How did anyone get past this?" "Oh, no, it gets really good in book 5. "Well, that's 5,000 pages from now. I cannot do that. I'm sorry. I've got other things to read." But yes, sci-fi, war, books on leadership, in not just like, here's how to lead, but just leaders in general. Space exploration. I'm really reading a really good book right now, or listening to it, because I do audiobook, because you got to cheat when you're trying to read 52 books in a year. And audiobooks is fine, right? It's about it's called The Man Who Knew the Way to the Moon, about the guy who pretty much pushed for the way that the lunar excursion module made it to the moon surface, and instead of building a single stage rocket. And that's really interesting, and it's part of the space history that I didn't know about. So I would recommend that book or on Audible. So yes, I get into a lot of trouble with Audible daily deals in general. Tim Challies and Audible really haven't helped my bank account too much. Let's see. Has your outlook on communion changed since coming from your background to saving faith dramatically, or is it a matter of from not saved to saved? Man, who wrote these questions? They could have done a lot better and taken much more time. So my view of communion has changed a lot, although I feel it is still deficient. And, coming from a Reformed perspective, I still feel like I run into Christianese a lot, where someone tells me, well, it's a means of grace. And I don't get that. Like I understand what it's kind of trying to convey, and I don't feel like there's a satisfactory answer. So I need a good book to kind of develop the history for me, and I feel like I'm deficient in it, and I feel like that in a lot of areas too. But that's neither here nor there. But I definitely have taken it more seriously, especially as I've gotten further along in my sanctification process, and I view it as something that clearly the early fathers and the early church viewed as important. There's a reason that it continued to try and go towards this, kind of transubstantiation, and then reformers definitely reformed it to go back to kind of what it was. Although, whether or not, you have the essence or the elements, and then, if it's just a memorial. So I definitely, and part of being a deacon, I volunteered to handing out the elements, and so I view that as even more of an important role of understanding why communion is important to us. And So yeah, I'm curious to learn from different perspectives, and I definitely feel like that's something I should concentrate my studies on. When witnessing to a person, is there some point where you draw a line and says, at this point, I'm casting pearls before swine, and you stop? Doesn't matter about close relationships for strangers on the internet. So I view strangers as being easier to witness to than family members, and of course strangers on the internet is easiest of all. Although I'm more apt to give up after someone says, here's a response, and I say, well, I did a video on this. Here, check it out. Well, I'm not going to watch that. All right, well, I'm not going to pay attention to anything you're saying. So, if I can point to something that I can, they can easily watch in 6 minutes rather than me typing all over again. Obviously, we're not having a dialogue, and I've informed them of what the gospel of grace is, and I feel my conscience is clear unless if there's something about the nagging from the Holy Spirit. So the way that my life has kind of turned out, I can owe it to being responsive to the Spirit. So there was at a point where I didn't have a really decent job, and I was working with a guy that I knew before, and I really didn't want to talk to him or interact with him. And so I just felt, you feel the Spirit just going, well, you're going to have to talk to him. I'm like, no, I don't want to. I'm going to spend all 8 hours of the shift with him, and I'm not going to talk to him because he's just that annoying and, that terrible. And so, of course, you either give in or you face repercussions later. And so I was like, all right, fine, I'll talk to him. And we had a really good conversation, presented the gospel to him, and he told me about a job opening through the process for a conversation that I eventually applied for and got. And that's how I was able to afford marrying my wife, and continued on to getting where I'm at today, because I listened to the Spirit and knew that he needed to hear the gospel. And yeah, not everyone's there's nobody that's outside the gospel that needs to hear the gospel of grace. Everyone needs to hear about it. And kind of like communion, we are the conduits through which God communicates His message to. That there's the means of grace by which we can take part, and that's the great thing about witnessing, is that God doesn't just do everything on His own for His own glory, which He definitely could. He doesn't need us for anything, but that by entering into a relationship, He calls us sons and daughters of Him, and then we present the Gospels to other people in that relationship. So yeah, at what point do you draw the line? Pretty much to where we're kind of spinning in circles, and as long as I've gotten the gospel out, call it a good day, and just do it in love and gentleness and kindness, like Peter told us to. So that's where I'd figure out. Who wrote the book of Hebrews? Wrong answers only. Well, I was watching Joe Rogan podcast, and it seems like everything's Constantine's fault. So Constantine clearly wrote the book of Hebrews. He definitely wanted the Jews who claimed to be Christian to not go back to the temple before it was burned down. And so clearly Constantine, he had a choice of all these books of Hebrews from different ones, and he chose it out of the 6 that were available to him. So that's clearly the right answer. It's definitely not Luke writing one of Paul's sermons. That's definitely not the answer. What's your ultimate favorite toy growing up at any point in your childhood? So my favorite toy was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe with Castle Grayskull. It was like this giant thing, if you're 4 foot, that was a whole big Castle Grayskull. And the weird thing about Castle Grayskull is that it was controlled by He-Man and the good people, but it's called Castle Grayskull. Isn't that weird? Like that shouldn't be something. That should be something that Skeletor goes into. But Skeletor had his throne in there, and that was kind of one of the first movies that my dad ever took me to. So I watched that every day after lunch, after nap time. And so when I got that was like the best toy ever, and had a lot of good play dates with that toy. When will you show the real video of eating pineapple pizza? I would like to know, Lauren. That was clearly like you weren't about ready to throw up on camera. That was a play because your sin nature caused you to fall, and you clearly enjoyed it so much that you were like, well, my pride is keeping me from devouring this, and you just turn the camera, and your entire family your entire family was attempting to keep you away because you were ravenous towards the pineapple on the pizza. So I'm just waiting for that video because I know it exists. Becca has told me that she has seen it, so 2 witnesses, there you go. My first video game system was, of course, the NES, and I didn't have even the version with Mario and Duck Hunt in it. I had one that had like some off-brand caveman game, so that was my very first one, and that was like a big deal because I always got everything really last in group because you just ask your parents for it. It's like, no, you don't ask your parents for stuff that expensive, and it was probably like $130 back in the day, which was a lot of money, and so we got it for Christmas one year. So the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, that was definitely my first. And of course, how objectively cute are my children. 2 + 2 = 4. You have the ability to do science, and there's such thing as objective morality, and it's in similar fashion that my kids are objectively cute. Even when they're being annoying and crying, which doesn't happen ever, especially not right now, is why I'm down here and they're up taking a nap. So those are my responses to, I guess, my questions. So you're welcome for my content. So hopefully this has been something to you, and you can check out the Tulips and Honey podcast, and then also if you want to enjoy them and head over to a nice little book club, Cave of the Cross Apologetics. CaveOfTheCross.com is where you can go for our content, and we're going to be starting a new book up here in 2 weeks. So hopefully that's something that you enjoy, and thank you for watching. Bye.